This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee is New York Times bestselling author Claudia Gray to talk to us all about The Fallen Star. Claudia, welcome to Coffee with Kenobi.
Hi there.
It's so nice to have you on the show. We, of course, so many of us are gigantic fans of your incredible work. And we're going to talk today all about The Fallen Star. This will be completely spoiler-free. We know some of you have not gotten a chance to finish the book yet, and we certainly do not want to rush you because it deserves, for you to breathe it in because it's such a great book. Let's talk, I guess, Claudia, at the beginning. Where are we in the galaxy at the start of The Fallen Star?
Oh, gosh. It's some months after the Rising Storm, and the Jedi have really turned on the Nile. They've made some progress against the Nile. They rebuilt after sort of the debacle of the Republic Fair and have really, it feels like the tide is turning. And that Starlight's finally getting to be what it was meant to be in the galaxy. That mission is on point.
Definitely. Yep. So, as you said, everything seems to be. They hope they're getting back to status quo, but naturally, it is Star Wars, so that's never going to be smooth. But what was it like for you to write this novel compared to writing Into the Dark?
In some ways it was easier than Into the Dark because Into the Dark, we were just getting phase 1 started and things were still a little bit in flux about exactly when certain events would occur. And I've talked about this before, but one of the events that I thought was going to be a really critical plot element in Into the Dark, we later all agreed that actually had to come later, which made total sense in terms of the larger narrative, but it also was like, okay, so where's the third act of Into the Dark? And that required sort of some rethinking and replotting, and I'd never worked within a big initiative like that before, so that took a little doing. Now, with The Fallen Star, we knew mostly where we were going, there were a couple things that changed. There was one big thing that I personally chose to change that everybody got on board with, but I knew where I was headed. I knew what was going to be happening. I had Light of the Jedi. I had at least a draft of The Rising Storm, and Charles and Kevin had already done just such fantastic work getting things set up and prepared. So in a lot of ways, I would say The Fallen Star was easier to do. Maybe it's easier to end the thing than to begin it. I don't know. That's how it worked out for me this time.
I wondered about that, just sort of the setup versus, at least with The Fallen Star, you've got a pretty established era in the Star Wars canon, so that helps you to kind of flesh things out a bit more.
Yeah, exactly.
So for The Fallen Star, one of my favorite things, I actually audibly gasped when I was reading this, you're able to revisit the crew of the vessel. Their chemistry really comes to life once again. What is it about these three that is inspiring to you as a creator?
Let's see. Well, just first as a fan, I think like a ton of fans, I'm a huge devotee of sort of the found family trope, wherever you can get it, where you have this group that's sort of banded together and really become a family, which I think the crew of the vessel are. And I really enjoy them as a creator in the context of the High Republic because it's a very Jedi-focused initiative. It's very, very much based in that. And I think there was a big hunger in that for the fandom because we've gotten a lot of really cool other media, like, The Mandalorian or Rogue One, but that stuff's been a little bit farther from the Jedi rather than closer to it. So it's a good thing, I think, for the initiative. But I also think you always need that little bit of balance. You need the outsider. You need the person who doesn't have these exceptional abilities in the heart of it, because I think without that centeredness, then it ceases to be wholly Star Wars. And the crew of the vessel play that role in the initiative overall for me, but in this book especially, we needed that. And also, I mean, it's an emotionally intense book, and I get to have a lot of fun with the crew, particularly Geode and Leox. So we needed every break from the soul-crushing tension that we could get. So enter Geode.
Exactly. Yeah, he really, dare I say, comes to life in this book really, really beautifully.
Thank you. I had fun with him.
Oh yeah, I can. It definitely reads on every page. You also have, as you mentioned, a wonderful collection of Jedi to work with in the Fallen Star. Let's talk about the featured Jedi, and there are definitely many. Let's talk about the featured Jedi here and the different mindset you have when writing each individual character.
Okay, can you specify a little bit?
Absolutely. For example, Elzar Mann and Stellan Gios certainly are both very much in the light, but they have very different ways that they kind of approach their connection with the Force, for example.
Yes. And of course, Elzar's coming out of the Rising Storm, which was a very, troubling time for him, and really made him second guess himself on some very profound levels. And he's coming back into the Fallen Star. He's recentered in a lot of ways. He's more balanced in a lot of ways, but to some extent, he's actually pulled back from the Force a little bit. It's partly not trusting himself, and I think partly making himself get fully ready before he allows himself that latitude once again. Whereas on the other hand, you have Stellan Gios, for whom I think self-doubt has generally not been one of his huge worries. But without getting into spoilers over much, the events of this book really test Stellan and make him look at Elzar in a different light. And he's not looking at where Elzar has failed. He's looking at how Elzar is different, and this allows him to respond to some things differently. And I think maybe because I think Stellan's always a little bit been not the caretaker in like a paternal way, but he's kind of always been the one who kept one hand on the wheel, no matter what Elzar and Avar were up to. There's always somebody that was like, I got this. And I think he's able to ask some questions about his own path for the first time in this book.
And I would say this one really, I think maybe more than any of the others, and they've all been wonderful, but I feel like this book really shows the humanity of the Jedi, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, one thing that was important to me was, everybody knows Avar and Elzar and Stellan grew up together and are friends, but a lot of that friendship had been so strongly based in what had gone before. And I really wanted a moment of connection with them now, what those relationships still mean to them right now. I'm being really vague now, but this is a non-spoilery bit. But I wanted to draw it more fully into the present, if that makes sense. And also, for what was happening in the present, not to be about we are bonded together as Jedi, but we're able to really talk as people in a more intimate way.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
But then we have the other side of the coin. Naturally, we have the Nihil. They've concocted perhaps their most malevolent scheme yet. Can you talk about the creative process that went into the catalyst for the Fallen Star and how it builds upon the previous disasters of the first two adult novels?
I could say that what we had planned to do with the Fallen Star was something that was part of the plan pretty much from the beginning, if not the very beginning, at least from very, very early stages. So I think we always knew we were headed here, and that's always been a factor. But how do you keep it tense to get to this point and then make it feel like this actually builds on that? I would say that was more of the writing challenge of it, if that's what you're asking me.
It is.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure.
No, definitely, because I mean they all have their own very powerful, I guess, really gut punch moments in each of the three novels, but this one
Mhm.
somehow seems to raise the bar. And as you mentioned, to me, and I said this in the review, beautifully amping the tension with every page. It's really quite impressive, I would say. And the English teacher in me certainly is enamored with your writing process as well. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you.
Absolutely. So here's something fun. You open your email and you've been invited to write a Star Wars anachronism. Elzar Mann, Stellan Gios, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Obi-Wan Kenobi meet in a cantina. What do you imagine their conversation and interactions would be like?
Oh, that would be really interesting. I mean, obviously, you sort of imagine Elzar and Qui-Gon, sort of the iconoclasts, gravitating toward each other more, and Obi-Wan and Stellan gravitating to each other more. But in some ways, Stellan is. I mean, in some ways, he's like the quote-unquote poster child of the Jedi. But hopefully, in the Fallen Star, we get into why sometimes that's a little bit of a trap. And for what it's worth, I do think that's a trap that Obi-Wan, for all that he very much sort of lived up to a lot of models and ideals, I don't think it's a trap he really fell into. Obi-Wan, it's really interesting because I think sometimes in some fan discourse, they see sort of his obedience to the order and his, following of the rules as sort of a weakness. And I don't see that. I think Obi-Wan is somebody who is very, very sure and centered of himself, not because of the rules. He believes in the rules, and there's a difference. And yet it's Qui-Gon who gave him that, So yeah, it would be really interesting to have them talk about that. And also I do think, Qui-Gon would understand that some of Elzar's iconoclasm is maybe a little bit more dangerous or destructive to him than Qui-Gon's is. I think Qui-Gon doesn't do things the way the Council wants them done, but he's very much in the light. That's not an issue he's a problem with. And of course, as we've seen with Elzar in the past, sometimes he's pulling on darkness a little bit, and that's a very slippery slope.
Yeah, Elzar and Anakin are probably, yeah, man, they could relate to each other very much. I love this, and of course you've written excellent novels about all of these characters. I love the idea of Qui-Gon and Stellan sort of debating the finer points of the Jedi Order. I think that would just be fascinating.
Yeah, and I think both Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan would be like, wait, they're a lot more flexible. This makes some sense. And it's like, wait, Yoda used to let that happen? Really? Because I mean that's sort of the reason that the Jedi are very bound by custom and tradition and adherence to Republic policy, and don't quite have the autonomy that the Order still has in the High Republic, or the greater, I don't want to say laxity because that's not the word, but the greater individualism that's still accepted within the Order. Way seekers are a thing, and you're still a Jedi and you're still welcome, even if you go off and do your own thing for a while. You're still not supposed to be having romantic relationships, but it happens a little more often, and it's sort of understood, well, this may be a phase that you go through and then you come back and it's all right, which I think young Obi-Wan and Satine would have been very interested to know that. I think they'd have loved that information,
Yes.
Yeah, I can definitely see them. And I think Qui-Gon would be less surprised and more like see this is what I've been getting at. I think Qui-Gon in a lot of ways would have been more at home in the High Republic era.
I do too. I love this. This is going to have people really talking. It's fantastic. So this isn't really a question so much as a conversation topic. How great is Mark Thompson in this audiobook?
He's always fantastic. I'm so glad they got him. I'm so glad. He's always great. The voices he does are such fun. And he's having fun, which is really the thing. You know, you can tell when, you know, there are a lot of audiobook people who are great professionals and do things, but do you get the sense that like they're having the time of their lives? You know, you don't always get that. And I feel like you get that with Mark.
I agree. And I really think, I mean, like you said, he's always wonderful, but he really brings this one to life. And I listened to this and I read it and I just kind of interchanged the two. And sometimes the way he reads some of your beautiful prose is just, and especially when you consider that he's actually the voice of all the characters, and you legitimately would not know that unless you looked at the credits.
Yeah, he does excellent accent work.
Indeed. For me, there are three people. I don't know if you're someone who blushes when you get compliments, so brace yourself. There are three different people to me that are critical to the success of Leia Organa as a staple of popular culture: George Lucas, Carrie Fisher, and you.
Aww.
It's true. Is there a character from your work in the High Republic era that similarly speaks to you the way Leia does?
I mean, no, but that's not a fair question. You know, I imprinted on Leia when I was 7 years old, like a baby gosling. You know, that there's no recapturing that kind of emotional influence that a character has. You can't. And you know, there are a lot of High Republic characters that I care very deeply about. You know, obviously I love my vessel crew. You know, I love Reith. I love Orla. I hadn't super connected to Stellan before writing The Fallen Star, and then wound up really loving him during the process of writing it. So, you know, they're huge to me, but nothing's ever going to quite top the character that you just absolutely began to adore when you were a little kid. They're just, nothing has that impact on you ever again, I don't think.
I love it. A perfect answer. Exactly what I would expect. And you know what? And I will say, I agree with you. Stellan, I always thought it was fine, but this book, the way you breathe life into him really took him over the top for me, for sure.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Evan, I really thought, as a side note, you were going to mention Leox for the vessel. I thought he was going to be close.
Oh, I love Leox. I do. I love him very much. He's great. Yeah, I mean, I could honestly write a whole book that would just be those three guys kind of going around having adventures in the galaxy. I could do that all day.
Oh, well, Disney Plus, if you're listening, Claudia is available. Let's make that happen.
That would be fun.
So good. Well, hey, Claudia, as always, it's such a pleasure to chat with you and get your insights into The Fallen Star, which of course is available anywhere you can buy books. Where can people want to reach out to you if they want to ask you a question or just say hello?
I'm not super available on social media these days, but on my Twitter, that's kept updated with releases and information, and when appearances start again, as I believe that they are going to do this year, fingers crossed, that will all be there. I'm one of 12 people who still has a Tumblr. You get some of my more unedited thoughts there, I think. I'm on Instagram as well. Although, yeah, you can interact with me a little bit on Instagram. I'm around. Let's put it that way. I'm around.
Perfect. Well, Claudia, again, thank you so much for being on Coffee with Kenobi.
Oh, thank you.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.